There we go. Okay.
You need to switch that off.
There we go.
All right, do you want to come and try that from here?
Yeah. Okay, so we're showing the screen. Okay, folks, apologies about that. We were in the wrong room. If you can just raise your hands for me so you can let me know that you can hear us, that would be great. Oh, thank you, Fiona. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Okay, guys, if you want to chat in the box below, you can just use the chat model for us. But you guys are on time. Fiona, yeah, I can see that you can hear. Can everybody else hear? If you can just let us know that you can just let us know that you can hear us. If you just raise your hand, so you'll just see on the control panel, you'll just see a little hand. Thank you, Kristen. That's really useful. Okay, Fiona, Gabriella, Ian, yeah, okay, all right, fantastic. I think most people can hear us. Lovely evening, nice to see you here, Phil Conway. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Welcome to the first Orienteering webinar of the year. Tonight, we're going to be having a look at planning with Barry Elkington, a massively experienced planner himself from Octavian Drubers. Through the night, you can ask us any questions, and there will be an opportunity at the end to ask us any questions as well. This session is being recorded as well for those people that can't make it tonight. So without further ado, I will give you Barry.
Right, thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. Let's get the screen properly set up and the camera. Okay. It's quite nice to see we've got over 20 people attending. So this presentation is really aimed at hints and tips for successful planning. I've broken it down into 5 sections: getting started, looking around the forest, some pre-race preparation on the day and after the event. It's not a step-by-step guide on how to do the planning. It's based on my experience of things that I've seen people get wrong, sometimes things they shouldn't, and sometimes just through really not thinking through the whole process. As Rob said, at any time if you want to type in a question, we'll try and address them as we go along. But that said, let's get going. Right. So the first thing is, what do you actually want to achieve with your planning process? And the main thing is that competitors should enjoy the event. It's both a mental challenge and a physical one. And both need to match the abilities of the competitor. And I'd like people to think, when they're doing the planning, if you're planning a particular course, think about the sort of person that's doing it. So if you're planning a white course, what can a 10-year-old, 9-year-old child see? They're not 6 foot tall. So if you have things hidden behind something that's 3 foot high, they can't see over it. And at the other end of the age range, think about people in their 70s. If you stick a control in the bottom of a very steep pit or gully, it's actually very, very difficult for those competitors to get down into it. So what might be a suitable control site for a 21-year-old isn't necessarily a suitable control site for a short green course, say. So yes, you really need to think about what will make competitors happy, and try and achieve that. And one way to actually help with that is talk to whoever planned or controlled the previous event on the area. They will tell you, the problems they had last time, what people liked, what they didn't like, and so you can get some feedback from them as well. So that's this idea about thinking of who your competitors are and separating them out into the different age classes is probably one of the important things that a lot of people don't think about. So when you start the planning, the main aim of the course is that you should provide an event that clearly shows a progression. So we have the color-coded system from white up to black, and each course has a technical and physical difficulty assigned to it. And there really is no reason for getting this wrong. on the technical difficulty side, the one thing to remember is that a lot of the areas in England really don't have anything harder than is required for a light green course. But don't go making that light green course easier than the short green or the green just because the terrain is nothing harder. When you're in relatively simple English areas, then in fact the light green and the short green are going to be pretty well the same course. And the green, blue, brown are technically going to be no harder because you can't make them any harder. So just don't worry about it, but do not make the light green easier just because of that, or you'll disappoint the competitors on that course. And the second thing is to get the course lengths right. And again, there's really no excuse for this. Most of the areas in the UK have been used many times before. So you can sort out what the course lengths ought to be. And they should show a steady progression. So if you look at the two examples on there, if you turn up to an event and you see course lengths are shown on the first line, then they look reasonable. People can choose to go up the scale 3K, 4K, 6K, 9K. So you choose where you want to run. If you look at the second set of courses, I just look at that and think, well, clearly something's wrong. Unless somebody's got some very strange planning processes and there's got a massive hill in there for the green course and not for the blue, then they don't show a sensible progression. So I look at that and I think straight away, actually, that probably isn't right. And somebody's going to be upset because they either are going to take too long or really there isn't a course to suit them at all. So try and get that progression, that steady progression up the courses so that people have a fair choice of where they want to go. So if we move on from there, right, so this is when you actually get down to the planning process. Most areas, I think the car park's probably decided for you. So you probably have a little choice on that. So when you actually start the planning process, often the most technically difficult to plan are technically the easiest. Trying to plan white and yellow courses in a lot of areas where you may have a limited number of paths to use can be quite tricky. So usually I would start by planning the white course, and that can actually set where you have the start and the finish. Certainly it defines where you have the finish. You may have more than one start, but there's not many events usually have more than one finish. So start by working out where your white course is going to go. And once you've done that, if you end up in a position where you have to have either a long walk to the start or a long walk from the finish, the preference really is to go for the option of a long walk to the start. People can use that to warm up, get themselves moving. Whereas if they've got a long walk back from the finish after they finish running, and obviously won't be a clothing dump up there, it's very easy to get quite cold. So given the choice, go for the start furthest away. Right, I'm hoping we're going to get some questions here, otherwise it's going to be a bit. So I will just get my watch. So yeah, I was saying a good way to start the planning is to start with the easiest courses first. Plan the white and the yellow and then work your way outwards. And on the longer courses, try and plan the good long legs first. If you can find some good long legs across the area, and then worry about joining them up with some shorter legs to get you into the right position to start and finish that leg. At this stage of the planning process, where you're actually just sitting in your armchair with a map and a pencil, then what you're really looking for is to get courses of about the right length and technical difficulty. When you go out into the forest, you may well find that some of those control sites aren't exactly what you thought they were, but you can adjust those slightly later on. If you've got the rough shape of the course and the distance is about right, then that's what you're aiming for. And the other thing I would encourage, although I'm sure some people would disagree, if the area is not big enough, don't send people round 3 or 4 times just to get a brown course in. If it really isn't big enough to support anything better than a nice 6 or 7K blue course, then I would just stick at the blue, apologise to the competitors, advertise it well in advance and say the longest course will be a blue at 7K, and that's that. People can decide not to attend if they think that's not far enough, but what you're giving is a good course, and not just running people around in circles for the sake of getting a 9K running. So when you've done a bit of armchair planning and you've gone out to look at the ground, the two things to sort out. The first thing is the start. And it says clearly in the rules, it's got to be on a map feature and it's mapped by a control banner. The restrictions placed on you by the white and the yellow courses really mean that this start has to be on a track and shouldn't be at a junction where they have to make a decision right from the start. And my preference is never to actually have a route choice right at the start where you pick up your maps. So to watch people standing around by the map boxes for 30 seconds or more really isn't great, and it will probably give people following them a chance to see what they're doing. So don't have a route choice out of the start, and also try to avoid a long run from the start boxes to the start banner. Again, you can't really enforce that. If people decide that they know where they are, they know where the start boxes are, then there's nothing to force them to go to that start banner. So if you really want to force people to go to that point, the only way to do it is to put a control there. So try and plan the first leg so that at least the initial part of the leg, there is no route choice on it. It might be just a run straight down a path for 50 or 100 meters, and then you can have a route choice. But you do not want to have people standing around right by the start boxes, by the map boxes, trying to figure out what to do. Okay. Out on the course itself, really you don't want to tempt people to cheat. So with things like crossing points and out of bounds, don't plan the course such that it actually gives a clear advantage to try and cheat, either to jump over a low fence when you're not supposed to, or to also run through an out of bounds area. Plan the courses to avoid out of bounds, and if people will be tempted to jump over a fence rather than go down to a crossing point, put a control on the crossing point, make people go there. That way you can ensure that your walls and fences aren't demolished. And I know people will say, well, actually that can take some route choice out of it, but given the option of either giving people route choice or potentially losing use of an area because somebody's demolished a wall, I think I'd go for going through through punching at the crossing point. And there is actually one way, if you want, of giving a route choice, which I've seen done on one or two occasions, and that's to have two crossing points, and you can put the same control number on each. You have to punch one of them, but it doesn't matter which one, as long as you've punched, say, control 147, and that was at the crossing point, that's fine. And that again forces people to go through a gate and avoid climbing the wall unnecessarily. And the second thing you see out in the terrain is the use of tape routes, often very useful on white and yellow courses for joining up paths or line features, or even in the autumn where the path is very vague, where it's covered in leaves. But don't just have a vague short piece of tape. Make sure the tape routes start and finish at somewhere which is very clear on the map, either at a control site or at one of the crossing points where it clearly is where the tape route starts or finishes. Okay, so then when you get to the finish, again, the precise location of the finish control should be obvious to anybody coming towards it. And it's important that it's easily located, and there should be no possibility of someone not being able to find it. So usually you can either use a path, which is easy to follow from the final control, or have it at the end of the tape route. Personally, I like to bring everybody into a control on a path, which you've probably got for the children's courses anyway. Bring everybody to that, and then everybody has the same run into the finish. And one thing that simplifies is what happens to people when they finish, because if you've got people approaching from all directions, then there's a danger that competitors stand around the finish control, and actually it may not be visible when approached from one direction. If everybody's coming down a path towards it, people will usually stand clear of that final route. So again, either a common control at the end, or at least have everybody such that the route from the final control brings them in along in the same direction to that final control. Have we had any questions yet, Rob? Or?
Yeah, we have, Barry. Yeah, John's been in touch and he's just asked about cons. Can they cope with two controls with the same number?
Yes, they should be able to. If both controls are coded to be, say, control 149, then the download software, as long as it's got 149 in it, will be able to won't know which one you've punched. And if you think about it, quite often, it's certainly in relays, you have two punches at one control site. Now, at a relay, those two boxes tend to be about a meter or so apart from each other. And again, the download system has no problem with you punching either of those. So the fact that if you use them on a crossing point, they'd be maybe 100 meters apart rather than 1 meter, the software would cover it quite happily.
Cool. Yeah, okay, that's the
one question
so we've had at the moment. And John's just asked there, what about the TED planning software as well?
Yes, I'm pretty certain it can do it because I've seen it done. I've never done it myself, but so that's mainly because we don't have many areas with lots of uncrossable walls. But I don't see any reason why it shouldn't.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Cheers, Barry. Yeah, and we'll get some more in a bit.
Yeah. Okay. So the next couple of slides are some thoughts on what I think are good course planning. So some obvious ones. So, you know, legs of different lengths. The worst sort of course is a 3K course with 10 300-meter legs, which just go round in a fairly standard circle. And you don't really change direction much between each leg. Ideally, you should have a mix of short and long legs. You know, as I said earlier, perhaps the way to do the planning is to find some good long legs to start with, and then join them up with some shorter, more technical ones. There may be no route choice, but perhaps it requires careful navigation through a bit of highly complex contours, or just a few compass bearings. So, you know, get people used to running fast on a couple of long routes, and then a couple of short ones where they suddenly have to change and use the compass. So, making people change technique from slow to fast, and this is really good if you've got say a piece of forest next to a piece of open area. You can have some really good fast running through the open area, and then put 2 or 3 complex controls in the wooded area where people, if they're not careful, will just carry on running at the speed they were going when the navigation was easy. So plenty of changes of direction. Again, you know, you don't really want people just running straight in and straight out. Make them think about which way they're going. Avoid dog legs. You don't really want people coming out of the control to lead the next competitor in. And it's not just what it looks like on the map. Quite often you can plan what doesn't look like a dog leg when you look at the red lines joining the controls up, but when you start looking at the routes people will take, then actually it becomes fairly obvious that the optimum route is to go in and then come back out the same way. So although it doesn't look like a dog leg on the printing, in reality it is. Try to offer people route choices, paths, straight lines, contouring round versus climbing over a hill. Try to avoid courses approaching the same control from the opposite direction. I know it's not always possible to do that if you've got a limited number of control sites, but generally if you're doing that, then people leaving the control will actually lead others into it. So it's a try to avoid, but I know sometimes it can't be done. And then the last point on that slide, don't tempt competitors to cheat by crossing out of bounds areas. You know, again, a good course should not even tempt people to go near it. So if you need to put an extra control in just to stop that happening, do it, because you can be certain that there'll be somebody out there, either intentionally or accidentally, will end up in an out of bounds area where they shouldn't be. Any more questions yet?
Yeah, well, we have a question which came in earlier actually
Right.
from Richard, and he was just asking about the question. The question essentially is that often that planners are in early retirement, so got a bit more time to plan events. But Richard's question was, what is the time commitment for a job for a planner for, say, a level C or a level D event?
Right. Yeah. Did everybody hear the question? How much time does it take to plan a level C or a level D event? I think I'd probably just talk about the level C events, because level D sometimes are on small parks and you can plan them in an afternoon if you know the area well. For a level C event where you're probably planning 8 color-coded courses, I would spend, my approach would be to first of all have a look at the map. I may have been there before, maybe not, but do a bit of armchair planning. I should know where the car park is, so I can do the plan on the armchair where I'd like the courses to go. Then probably go and spend 4 or 5 hours out there walking around, checking control sites, and discovering that some of my armchair planning really wasn't going to work, and thinking about it, and then coming back and having now got my original armchair courses plus some knowledge of what the ground actually looks like and what the control sites look like, then replan it, and hopefully this time get pretty close to the final courses that I want. Go back out for another day, another 4 or 5 hours, recheck the controls, and at this point hopefully you should be getting pretty close to the final courses. So that's 2 days in the forest and probably a couple of evenings sitting looking at the courses. You've then been in a position for the controller to go out and check it, and depending what the controller says, the controller may be entirely happy, in which case it's great, you've done it in 2 days and 2 evenings. Quite possibly there are going to be a couple of things the controller doesn't like, so may have been another quick visit out there for an hour or so just to do some final changes. So it shouldn't be a massive amount of time spent, especially if you've got some experience, you can do it that quickly. Obviously, if it's your first event, it'll take a bit longer because you'll be learning. But I sometimes think that perhaps people overcomplicate it. If you're planning a level C event for maybe a couple of 100 people, you don't need 70 control sites, which is what I've seen before. Even if if you had 200 people running and everybody's visited the same control site, you're still averaging only one competitor, I think about every 40 seconds, something like that. So you're not going to overuse the control. So you don't need to have controls, 20 or 30 meters apart unless you need it for technical reasons. If it's just to have a control in a piece of forest, you probably only need one. And so anything you can do to reduce the workload, that is quite useful.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think it's really important. I think anything around sort of mentoring and things like that, I think that's really, really useful, Barry. Alison's been in touch. Thank you, Alison. Can you just explain what a dog leg is?
A dog leg is where you go into the control and come back out the same way. So you see it very frequently in urban events. And that's part of the planning, to make people figure out how to get into the middle of somewhere and then come back out the same way, which is fine. In forest events, if you're, say, aiming for a control and you see people coming away in the same direction, then actually that can help to lead you into that control site. So it's generally not a good idea to do that. You kind of want people to go in from one direction and go out, either at 90 degrees or further forward, so you don't see people coming back towards you. Does that explain what a dogleg is?
Yeah, if you could just raise your hand, Alison, that would be fantastic. I think I got it.
Yep.
Yeah, excellent.
Oh, excellent.
Okay,
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Right. So onto the second slide on some thoughts, right? Ideally, you want the feature to be seen before the control. So, and this is where you have a nice little knoll, or a boulder. If you put the flag on the far side of the boulder, ideally people should see the feature first and then find the flag afterwards. But one thing you do have to avoid is bingo controls, right? and this is pits in bracken, boulders in fight, anything where if somebody is standing at the control site, the next competitor can run straight at it. And if there's nobody there, you're just looking for a pit which you cannot see from more than a few meters away in a vast sea of bracken. And you can usually tell controls like that because you see half a dozen people wandering around on a piece of moorland, and eventually somebody finds it and everybody then goes to that same point. And it really is, it's called bingo, because if you happen to be the last competitor to arrive just as somebody's found it, you will have lost no time at all. Don't have similar looking control sites within 60 meters of each other. You might call them a ditch and a gully, but in fact, if they look the same, then that really isn't good enough. The control sites really should be quite distinctive. Avoid fight, and nobody really likes going through fight. And one of the problems with fight is that it's what might be fight at the start, rhododendron bushes, for example, at the start, which are on the optimal route. Early competitors will fight their way through. By the time you get to the last competitor, there'll probably be quite a nice track through, so they'll lose no time at all. And some things I was taught very long time ago by Brian Parker, who was an excellent controller. I don't think he orienteers anymore, from down in Devon. You don't ever place a control site in a dubious area of the map. And if you ever have any doubts about either the map or the control site in a particular place, don't use it. So if in doubt, don't. The number of times I've got to the end, and you've heard people talking in the download tent, and I've heard a planner or controller say, yes, I thought some people wouldn't like that, or I thought that would cause a few complaints. I think, well, if you thought people would complain about it, why did you use it? You really don't want to cause any problems, and you don't want to upset people. So if you have any doubt about whether the map's accurate in a particular area, or whether the control's in the right place or not, just don't use that control, find something else. That way you'll find you won't be subject to complaints and people generally thinking you haven't done a particularly good job. Anything else coming there?
Yeah, Barry. So, Alison, just asking about armchair planning on cons or similar software or on paper, and only put the courses on cons near the end when the courses are finalised?
I will generally sit with a piece of paper and doodle on it. There's no right and wrong way of doing that. It depends how happy you are. I just find it easier to sit and look at a piece of paper and draw circles and put multiple bits of red lines on. But that's just the way I work. Some people are happy just to go straight online and do it. So whatever you find the easiest is the way to do it.
Sure. Yeah, I think I think like most things, when you're planning an event, it's a bit of trial and error, I think. Richard's been in touch around a question around rules,
right.
And that controls need to be visible from 10 meters in directions that runners might come from.
I think I cover that slightly further on. Yeah, I'll cover that. I've actually got a slide that covers that later on, so we'll pick that up then.
Okay, all right, great.
Okay, so we'll move on from there to something which has it actually appeared on Nope Sport and created some debate, and I actually agreed with some of the comments on there. And this is around what is a decision point, and this applies to white and yellow courses, and it's actually, the definition is where you can no longer continue in the same direction, e.g. being required to turn right or left off a path junction. So firstly, if you're on a big track, and you kind of have to get into a child's way of thinking. If you're on a big track and there's a small path going off to one side, but you just have to carry straight on down the big track, it's not really a decision point, because you're not actually being asked to decide anything, you're just going to keep on running. But for white courses, I would extend the definition to include a point where the competitor might think they have to change direction. So if you have a small path coming to a big one, and you have to cross the big path and continue down the same small path on the other side, I would actually put a control on that junction, because a child coming to a big track might think, oh, I need to do something here. And therefore it's worth pointing out, yes, you do. You actually have to go and continue down the same small track on the other side. But the question that was raised on Note Sport was around the control banner and punches. Should they be positioned in the direction of the next control? And what had prompted this was where you've got multiple white courses, which happens certainly at schools events and some come and try it events where you perhaps want to put 2 white courses out so that people can have one go and then have another. And my take on that is that you actually want to teach children to make a decision, but you don't want them to get lost. So if you, for example, are coming down a track and you come to a T-junction, and it's very obvious that the only choice you have is to turn left or right, then you probably don't need to put the control banner on one side or the other. You can simply put a banner there and the child knows that they have to do something, and then they can work out from the map where they go. So that's a fairly simple junction. I think you actually there want to make the junior think about which way they're going. On the other hand, there are track junctions in places like the Forest of Dean, for example, where there are perhaps half a dozen tracks all going from a junction. And actually the junction is not very clear. It's just a big open area in the middle of the trees. And in that case, you really do need to put the control banner on the path that the child's got to go down. Because even I have trouble in areas like that, sometimes figuring out when you've got 4 or 5 paths to choose from, which one I should actually go on. So I think the answer is make it so the child knows they've got to make a decision, and if they're likely to make the wrong decision, then help them. But if you've got a T-junction and you can easily have one white course going one way, one the other, put the control in a neutral position and make the child actually think about which way they're going. So I hope that answers that sort of dilemma which does occur at times. Right. Yeah, my next favourite hobby horse, control codes. They should be allocated. You don't want to disqualify people. So what you don't want is for people to mispunch accidentally. And also you don't want people finding one control code to think, oh, well, that's 147, 148, the next one along the ridge is 149, so I know where I am. So I have a very clear policy of always having 2 controls on the ground with very different control codes. So make both the last 2 digits different. So 134, 168 close to each other is fine. 134 and 143 is not. And the way I generally do my planning is we use condes in our club. And when I do my initial planning, I just use control numbers 31 up to whatever condes gets to, which is usually somewhere in the 70s. And only when I've finished all the planning and got all my controls do I then go through and renumber them all with a 3-digit control code, which is what the actual physical controls will be. And that way you don't find yourself having to suddenly realize, oh, I've got 2 consecutive numbers next to each other, I need to change it. Right from when you allocate them quite near the end of the planning process, you are getting numbers which are distinctively different. So that's the first thing. That's one way that people, you can make it less likely that somebody will mispunch and you'll disqualify them. The second thing I would advocate is do not allocate consecutive numbers, all those ending in the same digit, into one block of forest. Again, if they're similar, then they're all close together, people will mispunch. If you have consecutive numbers, people will just run along till they get to the one they want. And the last thing is something which I have seen done and I don't like. Do not use the sequence of numbers on one course. And you often see this with a white course, people have controls 101 to 110. There's 2 reasons for not doing that. The first is that actually we want to teach people to look at their control codes and check them right from when they start. and so just giving them a sequence to follow doesn't work, or doesn't teach them that skill. But the bigger problem it can cause is if for any reason you need to either add or remove a control quite late in the planning process. What you don't want to then have to do is to go in and renumber control sites. That is one way to get things wrong. So if you've used random controls and random control codes and you add a new number in, then it's quite easy. You just put another random number in. If your course now goes 106, 107, 138, 108, my guess is that probably quite a lot of people will miss 138 out. And again, that's something you want to avoid. You do not want to disqualify people if you can avoid it. So lastly, on control descriptions, purpose of control descriptions is to help competitors find the flag. Just keep them as short and simple as is necessary to locate the control. Don't use them to correct map errors. And one thing which we actually quite often fail to do is to give the dimension of the feature when it helps you to visualize what you're looking for. And this can be quite important. If I'm running on an open hillside and the control description just says crag, it doesn't really help me know how visible it is. If it's 1 meter high, I know I've got to be very careful. If it's a 3 meter high crag, I can see it from a lot further away. The same with depressions. If I'm going for a 1 meter depression, then I know I need to approach it quite slowly. If it's a 4 meter across, then it's obviously going to be a lot more visible. So when you're doing, by expressing the size of a feature, you can help people imagine better what it looks like. Please do put the sizes in, and that's something a lot of people don't do. I find it quite frustrating when I say, especially when I'm on an open hillside, I like to know whether I'm looking for something that's going to be hidden in the bracken or visible from 100 yards away. A final thing to think about is the what if. It's a bit defeatist, but you never know what might happen. You know, on the Sunday morning of the event or the weekend of the event, you might have problems with your car, you might be ill. So hopefully this won't happen, but just give some thought to what you might do if it does happen. You know, have you got other club members that could help out? Would the controller plus a couple of experienced helpers from within the club be able to put out all the controls in your absence? If you do some thinking about this beforehand, then if it does happen, you shouldn't panic. You actually have a plan in place for handling it. And this has happened to me where we actually, somebody's been ill and we've got the controller and we've got 2 people that can actually read the map accurately, that we have confidence in, and they put the controls out. So above all, don't panic. Right. We move now to the actual day of the event. And this is where you actually get to going out and putting your banners out. And the banner should be clearly visible once you've found the feature. So do not hide the controls. We mentioned earlier on, there was a question about, I think you said the 10 meter rule. It's actually a sort of 10% rule, that either the feature or the banner should be clearly visible when within 10% of the distance from the nearest sensible attack point. So if you're attacking from a path junction and it's 100 meters, then that banner should be visible from 10 meters in any direction, unless it specifically says it's on the north side of a knoll, in which case the knoll should be visible from 10 meters in any direction. That's considered to be the accuracy of the map and the compass work that people can do. So if it's 200 meters, then obviously it's visible from 20 meters. Don't hide the controls in the bottom of a pit or a small depression, even if the banner's visible, because you may well start the day with the banner clearly visible over the top of the edge of the pit. You're fairly certain after some early competitors have jumped into it, the banner will be flattened and lying on the bottom, and you turn that into a complete bingo control, which makes it very unfair for later runners. And the final hiding is people who hide controls in a re-entrant, for example, by placing it behind a tree. So you can run into the re-entrant 4 or 5 meters from where you should be. The control's on the other side of a tree, hidden, and you can't see it. If it's in a re-entrant, place it in the re-entrant where it's clearly visible from above and below. It's not a game of hide and seek. More questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So Andy's been in touch. Thank you, Andy. It's just about putting out controls. Do you have a rule of thumb about the times per control on the day of the event?
Yes. On to the next slide, right? It always allow more time than you think it will take.
Okay.
Yes. I think I used to work on a rule of thumb of about 10 to 12 an hour. It depends so much on the area. And how fast and whether you can do things like dropping controls off and moving them around. And most of our areas now, we generally tend to put out some of the more hidden controls the day before, often with the banner there on the floor, and then you just lift the banner up on the morning. I'm not fit enough to get round 50 controls from before an event anymore, so and it also, you're putting pressure on yourself, which gets back to allowing more time than you think you will take. If you can go out and put, say, 30 out of 50 controls out the day before, if you put them in the right place, you can then send a runner out, really, who hasn't just got to navigate to the controls. You know they're where they should be, and all they need to do is lift the banner up and make sure the control's activated. But yeah, it depends so much on the area, and there's a huge difference between small woodlands where the controls are all close together and easily accessible from paths, and more open, technically challenging areas.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
Right. And when people finish, go and talk to them. What didn't they enjoy? But one thing to remember is that competitors aren't always right, and this is if they've had a bad run, even if it's not your fault, then almost certainly they'll blame you, the map, the control sites, because it's never their fault. Right, I'll try about 5 minutes more to go now. When the event's over, you really want to see what you can learn from it for next time. So go and have a look at WinSplits, Splits Browser, which are the two good splits analysis software. And while I'm here, I would actually encourage planners to encourage their clubs to put the results up onto WinSplits and Splits Browser, because it's so much more useful being able to use the analysis that they provide than just putting a list of splits up with no real analysis behind them. From that, you can see were the course lengths about right, and you have to ignore competitors who are running above or below their normal course. If somebody's perhaps coming back from injury, but is a top competitor and only wants to run 3 or 4K, don't be surprised if they go around a short green course in 25 minutes. Likewise, you find people who just like to go out for a long run, and therefore will take 2 hours on a brown course and be quite happy with it. The other things to look for is more along the bottom one, which has one control cause problems for a lot of competitors, and if it has, why? Was the area not mapped very well? Was the control hidden? You try and figure out why, because it probably means that you might have got something not quite right. Have you got another question?
Yeah, Alison's just talking about controls actually, and just wanted to know, do you wake the controls up before the event starts? E.g., if they were put out the day before, you might not want to go around them all again on the day and wake them up.
If the controls do all need waking up in the morning, you've got to make sure they're awake for when the first competitors arrive. Quite often the controller will check most of the controls on the morning, and if not, find somebody that's prepared to just go out and wake them up. So you need to know what the timings have been set for your controls to go to sleep. So find out what that is from the person that looks after the kit in your club, and make sure that they are awake beforehand. And there's something I learnt, which I didn't realize, that you can't, if a contactless control goes to sleep, an SI contactless control goes to sleep, you can't wake it up just by waving a SIAC card across the top of it. You physically have to punch it. And if I'm wrong on that, I apologise, but that's what I've been told, that the controls have to be woken up by a physical punch. And therefore, if you're advertising the event as contactless and the first competitor arrives and the control hasn't been woken up, they're going to waste a lot of time and probably get quite cross. But yeah, you need to make sure the controls are awake.
Great.
Right. Second thing to look at is route gadget, and I think this is wonderful, especially now we've got more and more people using GPSs to track their routes, and the ability to upload those routes onto route gadget. So you can really have a good look to see whether everybody's taken the same route, whether there's been a good set of route choices, and look at, by using the split times from wind splits, you can see whether the leaders have taken better routes than others. Does it look like it was faster to go around the track or do straight? And even you sometimes find competitors find route choices you hadn't even thought of, which is always an education in itself. Some quite obscure long track route which you didn't even spot might be half a kilometre further, but actually you can run the entire, if you're a good runner, you can run a K in probably less time than you can run straight through a forest, if it's kind of hard to run through. So they may find routes you didn't think of, but it's always good analysis, and also look at why people have made mistakes. So that's it. You're now well after the event. Think about the whole planning experience. You should have enjoyed it. If you've had some nice weather, it'll be nice out in the forest. One thing it does do is it certainly improves your map reading. Being forced to slow down and really read the map to make sure you've got the control in the right place will help you when you next compete. And think about what you've learned. And the nice thing is that it will be easier next time. The more times you do the planning, or the more times you plan events, the easier you find it. You learn tricks of how things like condes work. You learn the most efficient way to handle controls and put them out. So hopefully you'll have had a good time and you'll want to do it again. So I hope that's proved a useful 50 minutes. We've got 10 minutes left for any questions if people want to put them in, and I'll do it to answer them.
Yeah, Barry, a question just coming in there from Roger about safety considerations.
Yes. I tend to forget that in the Midlands, most areas are pretty safe. You do need to plan to think about the safety of the courses. So especially things like crags, if you've got big crags, then it's reasonably safe to have people going from the bottom to the top, and they're not likely to run over the edge of them. Whereas coming downhill, if there's a crag, then it's far less likely somebody will see it. So think about things like that. Yeah, if you've got craggy areas, try to take people up them rather than down. Think about some of the junior courses. Probably don't take them near marshes or water unless it's marshaled. And we've seen this. We have in Birmingham, we have Sutton Park, where we run the Peter Palmer relays and quite a number of junior events. And if we have a control along the edge of the lake, we always have a marshal there just to make sure that if a child does fall in, you can fish them out quite easily. As far as I know, nobody's gone in yet, but you never know.
You never know.
And yes, the risk assessment, the planner has quite an important input to that. It isn't just the organiser's task. The organiser should give a section to the planner to say, right, what dangers have you noted that we need to take care of, and that will include, as well as things like crags and pits, also road crossings. Do we need a timed out road crossing? Or is it so quiet and such good visibility that we can just let people cross over it?
Sure, and Richard, that's a really great question, and one that you can certainly answer and I can't. Does the planning software allow you to calculate distance of alternative route choices?
The answer is I don't know. I believe it does. I've seen some analysis produced by people like David May for sprint races, which kind of suggests that it will allow you to do that. but I've never actually tried to do it myself.
Okay.
But yes, I have seen it done, but whether it's a fairly manual process, which I can imagine it would be. What you can do with the software is to force it to go through certain points. So obviously, if you have crossing points which are compulsory, then you put the red line through that. So I guess you could play around by creating extra points on the course and get the software to calculate the length for you.
Excellent. And yeah, we've got a question in, which is a development question, which I was scrambling around for. Martin, thank you very much for your question. At the end of this presentation, there's going to be my email address. If you can just drop me an email address, that'd be fantastic. Martin's question was, are there any planning training courses? There are. I just can't find them at the moment, but we'll definitely have a look for them for you.
Yes, there are courses that can be run. Learning to plan, I think, is something that's quite hard to teach as a one-sided presentation. It's easiest done to say, right, sit down in a group, understand what you're trying to plan. So say you're trying to plan a white course, and then have a 20-minute exercise where everybody sketches out a white course, and you then swap maps with the person next to you and basically mark each other's work and then discuss what you have learnt by doing that. That teaches you the logistics of how to plan courses of different standards. But there's also the whole planning process, the steps you have to go through. And I think a lot of clubs have probably got material which covers that, because it can be quite club specific. So for example, have you got permission to use the area? Are there any areas that you shouldn't use, out of bounds areas? How's that managed within the club? How are the maps handled within a club? How are all the color settings in Condes and OCAD handled? So from that point of view, each club probably has its own methods. But I think, a regional workshop or even a club workshop where people just sit down and try to do some armchair planning is actually quite a good thing to do.
Yeah, I've just found the link for that, Martin. So I will send that over to you. They can be few and far between. So if anybody else is interested, if you can let us know via email, and then obviously we can put a course in the right place for everybody who wants to take part. Yeah, so a couple of more questions then. Right. So we have from Mike Shires. Is there much difference between the Condes and the purple pen for course planning? I've always used the latter, so I'm interested to know if Condes is better.
I don't know. Our club uses Condes. The nice thing about the way we do it is we have the Condes and the OCAD files all set up with standard IOF colors, so that always is correct. Condes is very good for doing other odd events like relays. I think we've used it for the Peter Palmer relays, and it was used at last year's JK, because you can actually get Condes to do all the gaffling for you and actually print the team and leg number onto every map. So we arranged the printing such that it put the team number and the leg number in the top left-hand corner of the map. We could then fold the maps. And for relays, that gets you away from the whole process of having to label maps and make sure you've got everything right. Condes, the relay planning software, will make sure it is all correct for you. I don't know whether Purple Pen does that, and you probably don't need it if you're just planning simple events. But I think we've got Condes, we use it, and that's the standard the club uses. So again, it varies by club, and I guess partly if you're used to using a particular type of software, then stick to that. But yeah, we use Condes and OCAD, and that seems to work very well.
Okay, excellent. Right, we've got no more
run out of questions
left. We've got no more questions left. So if you have any more, now's your time.
You've got 3 minutes left.
Yeah, or if you disappear, then we know that you haven't got any more questions. So that's kind of it from us. So appreciate. I'm off the camera at the moment, but That's it from us.
We can get Rob
oh,
on.
well, thank you very much. Yeah, cheers.
We got my lounge door there.
It was going so professional until then. So which way are we going? There we
that
go.
Way.
So yeah, so if you have any more questions for us, I will have a look in the box. Yeah, so Andy, anything about videoing controls? Okay.
Ooh, for what purpose? Why do you want to video control to see how people are behaving there, or which way they're coming in from?
If you can come back to us, Andy, on that, and we'll try and clear that up for you. Gabriella, thank you for your question about how do you calculate climb on courses?
Counting contours, I do it manually. I always think that you get, it's fairly quick to count up the contours on a fairly manual basis, and actually, getting it within 5 meters is never correct, because you can never actually work out whether a straight line goes over a contour and back again, whether you really are going up and down 5 meters. So I would just calculate them by hand. I'm not sure whether, if you do the planning in OCAD, whether it can actually do it for you. I can imagine for some of the bigger events they probably do that. But no, I mean, again, it comes back to most of the areas I plan on are not particularly physical, and therefore to just go around and do a quick manual count of the contours is not too hard.
Okay, I'm not too sure if Andy, you come back to us about that, but you got my email address at the end anyway, and we can always clear that up for you. But if you've got any more questions, now's your time. Or if you're done and you've got everything, that's fantastic. If you do have any more questions that you're not too sure about, please get in touch with us. You've got my email address on the screen there at the moment. So if I don't know the answer, then obviously we can find somebody else that certainly does. Okay. All right. Well, that's it from us.
Next one.
Yeah, so next ones. Thank you, Barry. Next ones, we've obviously done the planning focus tonight. There is another one on the Thursday, the 14th of March, a webinar, same sort of thing, communication, social media versus traditional methods. Really interesting conversation, that one. Everybody thinks that social media is the way these days, but we know that word of mouth can be really important as well. So that will start at 7 o'clock. You'll be able to find more information on about that on our social media pages, which is quite funny, but you do have word of mouth as well, so you'll be able to let everybody else know about that one coming up. And if you've enjoyed it, or if you've got any other feedback or anything like that at all, we'd really appreciate it. This is the first one of the year. We've done 3 pilots before this, and we're using a new system tonight, so we hope that this has been really useful. Any more questions, please let us know. Just got a couple more, so yeah, we will get to that, Roger. Any useful links for planning documentation? So
there are some links, I think, on the British Orienteering website under the event officials planning side. I'll promote my own guidelines for planning color-coded courses, one for each of the courses. It covers goes through from white. They originally were written as articles for comfort sport, but they now seem to have been adopted and used by a lot of people. I still think they're a useful guide, and I sometimes reread them to try and remind myself what I ought to be planning. And as I say, I think that the actual mechanism around the planning is, where do the controls come from, who gets permissions, how do I get the map, varies so much between one club and another, that each club has to have its own sort of short guidelines around that, because you can't write something which covers all the clubs, and it's just not the same.
Okay, no, I think that's brilliant, Barry, and I've certainly learnt loads tonight, particularly about controls with numbers and things like that, because I certainly got it wrong on a yellow on Saturday, and thankfully my daughter corrected me. Right. So thank you very much, everybody. That's it for tonight. Thank you so much for the kind messages as well, thanking us for a good session. It's only a good session if you guys interact with us, otherwise we're just sat here talking to ourselves. So that's it. Thank you very much. And
good night.
Tell everyone. Yeah.
It's good night from me.
And it's
good night from
certainly
him.
good night from me.